Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm David Hegarty and I'm a psychologist and head of psychometrics at NovaPsych. Today I want to introduce you to the Maladaptive Schema Scale, the MSS, which is a modern open source schema assessment tool that we've been developing and validating here at NovaPsych. By the end of this talk, I hope you'll be excited to give it a try in your own practice. So a consensus review by Pilkington in 2023 identified schema constructs and measures as a top priority for future research. We were hearing the same thing from our users. We were hearing feedback from clinicians such as, I really need a shorter assessment that doesn't sacrifice depth. Traditional schemas aren't helping my clients with trauma and attachment issues. I need expanded and up-to-date schemas. Or I need a framework to help me interpret the scores. These are real everyday frustrations, and they're exactly what motivated us to develop the MSS. So here's what we built. The MSS is 108 items measuring 27 schemas. This makes it 50% shorter than the YSQ long form, which means your clients aren't sitting there for 45 minutes clicking through endless questions. It's completely open source and free. No licensing fees, no restrictions on how you use it. You can use it clinically, you can use it in research, you can modify it if you need to. It's yours. We've integrated contemporary attachment theory and trauma-informed constructs that weren't in the original schema model. We've got evidence-based cutoffs derived from the 90th percentile of our clinical sample, so when someone scores high, you know it actually means something. And critically, it's been validated using RASH methodology, which is increasingly regarded as the gold standard for psychometric assessment. I'll show you what that means in a moment. And of course, importantly, this has been peer-reviewed and has been accepted for publication in the journal Assessment. So here are all 27 schemas in the MSS. You can use this QR code to see the full list for your reference. The green ones are completely new, not in previous assessments at all. The orange ones are refined. We've maybe taken other people's recommendations for separation or separated existing schemas that are assessed in other measures into more clinically useful distinctions. So let me go into a little more detail on these new and refined features. So on the new side, we have avoidant attachment. So attachment theory was foundational to Young's model, but the YSQ only measured anxious attachment via abandonment. Meta-analysis confirms this. Abandonment correlates much more strongly with anxious than avoidant patterns. We were missing half the attachment picture. Now we can identify both patterns that emerge from insecure attachment. Others are dangerous, genuinely trauma-informed. Musil's systematic review showed that expecting malevolence clusters differently from simple mistrust. The research is clear. Emotional abuse creates mistrust, but physical or sexual abuse creates expectations of intentional harm. Different trauma types require different therapeutic approaches, and we validated this separation empirically. Low self-efficacy replaces insufficient self-control, which overlap with ADHD symptoms. We've documented adults who misattributed executive function difficulties to schemas before getting ADHD diagnoses. Low self-efficacy is based on Bandura's established construct, showed excellent psychometrics, and gives us a treatment target without pathologizing neurodevelopmental differences. Over-reliance on emotions and full control capture modern phenomena, emotional reasoning and the manifesting culture, with origins in parental indulgence rather than abuse. Then the three from Arndt et al.'s 2021 position paper, lack of coherent identity, meaningless world, and unfairness. These integrate Dweck's core need for coherence, completely absent from Young's model. Critically, this is the first empirical validation. Each showed fit to the RASH model with favourable psychometric properties. They give us our first comprehensive way to understand dissociation, psychosis, and severe personality pathology within schema therapy. On the refined side, following Yalson's recent modification of the YSQ-R, we've used their recommendations and separated punitiveness into self versus others. Mistrust abuse was separated based on Musil's systematic review and trauma research, showing these create fundamentally different expectations, requiring different interventions, and insufficient self-control was removed. The psychometrics were poor, and frankly, it was overlapping too much with ADHD symptoms, which is not helpful. So bear with me for a moment. This is where we get a bit technical, but it's worth it as the psychometrics are an important aspect of any scale. So firstly, we tested this on over 2,000 people, both clinical and non-clinical samples in accordance with Monash University's ethics approval. That's a large, diverse sample, which means our results are stable. We're not making claims based on a small number of university students. Every single one of our 27 schemas shows excellent rash model fit. What does that mean? Well, it means each schema measures what it claims to measure. The items are working together to assess a single construct. The MSS is currently the only schema scale to test for this strict model fit. And it's really important because otherwise it raises questions about whether a scale is actually measuring what we think it's measuring. No item misfit. All 108 items contribute meaningfully to their respective schemas. We didn't just throw items in and hope for the best. Every single item earned its place. Strict unidimensionality. Each schema measures only one thing. When you look at a client's abandonment score, you're not getting a jumbled mix of abandonment and something else. It's clean, it's interpretable. Measurement invariance by gender, age, and clinical group. This is a rare property for most measures, and it means the scale works the same way for men and women, for younger, older clients, and for clinical and non-clinical populations. The opposite of measurement invariance is item bias, and it's known as a scale killer. Here, a score of 3.5 means the same thing regardless of who's completing it. And finally, strong reliability. PSI, that's Person Separation Index, above 0.7 for 25 of our 27 schemas. You can trust these scores, they're consistent and dependable. Now I know that's a bit technical, but here's the bottom line. This is the only schema measure to achieve this level of psychometric rigor, and that matters because when you're making clinical decisions, you want to know the tool you're using actually works. So we've established this scale is psychometrically sound, but does it actually measure the same constructs as the established measures? We compared the MSS to the YSQR on participants who completed both. The average correlation was 0.68, which is strong. But then look at these specific correlations. Abandonment correlated at 0.889, and importantly, the MSS uses only 4 items to measure abandonment compared to 8 in the YSQR. We're getting the same information with half the items. Defectiveness correlated at 0.858. Entitlement at 0.770. What this tells us is the MSS is measuring the same underlying constructs but more efficiently. You're not losing information by using a shorter scale. Here's one of the more fascinating findings from our validation study of the MSS. The lack of coherent identity schema showed greater response variability across all other schemas. What do I mean by that? Well, people who scored low on lack of coherent identity, so people who have a stable sense of self, were consistent in how they endorsed other schemas. But people who scored high on lack of coherent identity, people who struggle with identity, had much more variation. Their responses were all over the place, and this was statistically significant. Think about what this means clinically. When someone lacks a coherent sense of self, their schema profile becomes more unstable and contradictory. And that's exactly what we see in dissociation, identity disturbance, and complex trauma. The measure is picking up on something real, the fragmentation and instability that comes with identity disturbance. In fact, this has just recently been further validated, where it's been found that when scoring high in both lack of coherent identity and vulnerability to dangerous world schemas on the MSS, then there's an 84% chance of experiencing clinically significant dissociation. So does the MSS actually distinguish between clinical and non-clinical populations? Yes, 25 of the 27 schemas show significant differences between clinical and non-clinical groups with a medium effect size overall. In other words, it validates what clinicians already know. People in therapy have more maladaptive schemas than those who aren't in therapy. The MSS quantifies these differences reliably, making it a useful tool for assessment and tracking treatment progress. Interestingly, entitlement and over-reliance on emotion showed higher mean scores in non-clinical groups. Both extremes can be problematic. Counselling-seeking patients commonly present with difficulties asserting their needs and with distrust of emotions due to difficulties understanding them. The low end of these schemas, Importantly though, individual clinical cases did score high, demonstrating these schemas capture clinically relevant pathology across the full spectrum. One of the things we wanted to build into the MSS from the start was flexibility in how you conceptualise results. You can organise schemas by childhood needs clusters: safety, autonomy, spontaneity, limits, expression and coherence. This framework's great for understanding developmental origins. Where did these schemas come from? What needs weren't met? Or you can organise by schema focus categories: world, relationships, inadequate self, inflated self and others. This framework's brilliant for understanding relational patterns. How does this client relate to others? How do they see themselves? Both structures showed excellent CFA fit, that's confirmatory factor analysis, with CFI and TLI both at or above 0.95 level, which is the ideal range. So use whichever framework suits your formulation. You've got the flexibility to choose. Let me just point out one way it can be used. You might notice that realistic limits in the childhood unmet needs framework and inflated self within the schema focus framework contain exactly the same three schemas. This isn't a coincidence or an accident. It shows how lacking limits in childhood could potentially manifest as inflated self-view in adulthood. The two frameworks are complementary, different angles on the same phenomenon, a developmental perspective or a relational perspective. So let me show you what this looks like in practice. So here's Maria, 32 years old. She's presenting with relationship difficulties, fear of abandonment, and perfectionism. When we look at her MSS profile, three schemas jump out, all at or above the 90th percentile, which is our evidence-based cutoff for clinical significance. Abandonment at 3.5, unrelenting standards at 3.5, and defectiveness at 3.0. Now, when we look at the childhood unmet needs framework, her safety and abandonment cluster is elevated at 2.7. This tells us something important for treatment. Before we tackle her perfectionism, her unrelenting standards, we need to build safety and address her attachment fears. If she doesn't feel secure, pushing her to let go of control through perfectionism is likely to backfire. This framework helps us prioritize. It tells us start here, then move here. So what do you actually get when you use the MSS on NovoPsych? You get automated scoring through the NovoPsych platform. You don't need to calculate anything manually. It's all done for you with instant results. You get clear interpretation guidance. We've built in clinical notes to help you make sense of the profile. You get schema description handouts for clients. You can give this to your clients so they understand what their schemas mean in plain English. We've got evidence-based cutoffs at the 90th percentile, so when something's elevated, you know it's clinically meaningful. And it's open source, completely free for clinical and research use, no restrictions. And it takes about 15 minutes to complete. That's meaningful time saved compared to 30 to 45 minutes for the longer forms. So before I wrap up, I want to acknowledge the team who made this possible. Dr. Ben Buchanan, clinical psychologist, Emerson Bartholomew, our psychometrician who did the heavy lifting on the rash analysis, and Dr. Carla Smythe, clinical psychologist. Then, of course, thank you to the multitude of clinicians who have given feedback on the MSS. This released version has gone through 5 iterations in its development, and it's thanks to the feedback of these clinicians that we have this published version. It's been a true team effort, and I'm incredibly proud of what we've built together. So to wrap up, the MSS is shorter, more comprehensive, psychometrically sound, and free. It gives you clinical insights that help with both formulation and treatment planning. I genuinely believe this tool can make your assessment process more efficient and more meaningful. If you want to try it, scan this QR code or go to the link on the screen. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thanks.